Alright guys, welcome back to another Unreal Engine 5 tutorial, and today we're just going to do some simple blueprints kind of just to get us going and actually putting into practice some of the concepts and things that I've talked about in the last two videos. So before I begin, please make sure that you have a solid understanding of what I talked about in the last two videos involving Blueprint. That was an introduction to Blueprint and data types and variables in the blueprinting scripting language. If you have any questions on that, again, please feel free to leave a comment, but I'm going to assume that you watched both of those videos and you have a comprehension of all the topics that I discussed in those videos. Alright, so let's go ahead, and in this video today, I just want to go ahead and just build some very simple and basic blueprints, and we're not even going to make our own blueprint actor yet. We're just going to actually work inside of the blueprint character just to get us going here, okay? So just in case you need a refresher on how to get to the character, you can either go to the All menu here and type in character, like so, and click on this guy right here, or you can come here, you can double click on content, double click on third person, blueprints, and it's right here. Alright, so here is our character. I'm going to go ahead and grab the event graph here and bring it over here. As well as this guy. This is generally how I like my setups for blueprints. I like all the details about a specific component over here. The event graph, which these are all the triggers. Yet again, all the triggers that trigger things to happen. And then the viewport, which is the way your character looks, and you can toggle between the blueprint itself with all the variables and the events here, and the components here. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started here. To begin with, I'm going to create a variable. Again, this is from the last tutorial. I'll go ahead and delete this. Variables are the names or containers for data, and you can give variables a name. Variables can name whatever you want. They just can't start with a number and they can't have a space. Blueprint is an exception, but that's the general rule when it comes to variables. Now, I'm going to go ahead and create a new variable here, and I'm going to call this message. Oops, if I can spell message. Boom. And you'll notice here that every variable here has what's called a naming convention. The naming convention generally for Unreal is to capitalize the first letter of each word. This is called Pascal case. We do this because if you don't do this, notice how hard it is to read this. For most of you, I'm sure, even if I zoomed in here, hopefully I can zoom in. I can't. Let's drag this over. And most of you probably can't read what this says, even if you really zoomed in and tried. Not because of visibility, although that's a little bit of it, but just the fact that, you know, it's hard to tell where words stop and words end, or words start and words end. To fix this, you can simply just capitalize the first letter of each word, and now readability is much better. Now it clearly says message for Anthony, the player. So this is why we use Pascal case, as it's called. This is capitalizing the first letter of each word for variable names. In this case, I want to name this variable message because this is going to be a message. The message is going to take the data string. So this will be a variable that contains a string. And then here I can create the message I want, which is, we'll call this welcome to the game. Boom. So now I'm going to go ahead and go over to my event graph. This is where all the triggers for various actions will happen, right? And there's already some custom triggers here for the movement of the character. Right above this, I'm going to go ahead and right click, and I'm going to type in input. Then I'm going to scroll down, and here are a whole bunch of keyboard events. These are all events that happen when you click a keyboard. You can trigger something to happen. So in this case, when I click the 1 key, just do the number 1 here, I want something to happen. Now notice here over in my event graph, it added this event as a tracker. And if I ever want to check what's happening on a specific event, I can always click over here in the event graph and go to it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and drag out pressed here. And I'm going to go ahead and print a string. And then I'm going to get this message. So I'm going to get the variable's value by doing a getter here. You can also hold control and drag, and it will grab that, and you can drag it right into the box there, and message will now be printed whenever number 1 is pressed. So now that I have this blueprint created, I'm going to go ahead and compile and save. All right, I'm going to go ahead and come here, and when I click play, maybe it's this one, there it goes. Welcome to the game. Right, so very, very nice, straightforward example of using a blueprint. All right. Now, another cool thing about Blueprint is you can also alter the value of specific properties or details that a component has. So let's go ahead and go over here to my components tree. This is all the components that make up my character. I'm not going to talk all about the various individual components. We're just going to focus on this character movement component. Now, if you look in the character movement component here, you have all these different details, and these all dictate, obviously, how your character moves. Pretty crazy, right? All right, so inside the character movement component, I'm going to make it so that when you are holding the 1 key here, your jump height increases. How am I going to do that? Well, if I look here in the details panel of the character move component, you have jump Z velocity. Remember, Z is the upwards direction, and you can tell this because of this little axis right here. So, if I change that velocity here, the Z velocity, which is that blue arrow, I change how far my character will jump up, which is dictated right here in this character move component. Now, if you can't seem to find this tree, or you're getting a little confused about how I have this set up, it's pretty easy to set up. You just go to the Windows panel here, and I'll just walk through this setup process just one more time. Let's say you have this all kind of weird like this. You just click Windows, you click Details. This will pop up. If you needed to drag and drop it over there, you can drag it until it snaps into place. Try and get it to snap. Come on, snap. There it goes. And then you come over here and you can get components. Here are all the components for your actor. And then you can also get my blueprint, which shows the various graphs and events and the variable values here. We'll talk about macros and functions later. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and then come here to my event tree. And this time, I'm gonna go ahead and go to my component and create a reference to this character movement component. To do this, I'm just going to drag this out here on the screen, and now I have the character movement component, which means that I now have access to all of the details of the character movement component. So I'm going to go ahead and get jump Z velocity right here. Here is the jump Z velocity, which is currently the value that is contained by the jump Z velocity here in the character movement component. So let's see here if I find it, jump. So as you can see, it's 700 centimeters per second is the jump Z velocity. And what's cool is I can actually change this. So rather than doing a getter here, I'm going to grab the setter. So I'm going to set the jump Z velocity. And as you can see, it's right here. Boom. Okay, so when 1 is pressed, I'm going to set the jump Z velocity to a value. And then when I release it, I'm going to set the jump Z velocity to a different value. Let's go ahead and get this node again. I just did Control D there to duplicate this node. Notice I need the target to still be the character movement component. This lets this node right here, the target node, tells Blueprint that I'm grabbing this from the character movement component specifically. So this specific components contains the jump Z velocity. You have this just in case other components have that same value or that same property. Okay, so when it's released, I'm also going to change it here. Now, I can come over here to my blueprints, and I'm going to create 2 variables. I'm going to call this new jump height. And then here, I'm going to create a different variable and call it default jump height. Now, notice here, both of these are going to take a float. So I need to change the type of data that my variable contains from a string to a float. I do that just like that, and now I compile these. Now, the new jump height, I'm going to make, you can make this whatever you want. I'm going to make it 1,000. And then the default jump height, I'm going to make, let's make it 700. Okay. Now, last thing I'm going to do here is I also want, when my game begins to play, I want to set it to the default jump height. So I'm going to grab this one more time, duplicate it, bring it down here, boom, and I'm going to grab my setter here. And right when the game begins here, I'm also going to change the character movement component here to the default jump height. So let's go ahead and grab that. So I'm going to grab that here. I'm going to get it. Okay. When I have the new jump height, I'm going to get that here. I'm going to get it here. And I'm also going to grab the default jump height, and I'm going to bring it right here. Boom. Okay. All right. So when the game begins to play, it's going to set it to the default jump height, which is a variable under my blueprint. Then obviously the player is going to get controlled. All of this logic will happen. We'll talk about this later. Then whenever I click the 1 key, my player character movement component is going to get a new jump Z velocity. And then when I release the 1 key, it's going to reset back to the default jump height. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and compile this. Let's make sure that I have these set to numbers. So I have that to 1,000. I have that to 700. Let's make this 2,000 just so you can see a massive difference. Boom. Compile. Save. All right. I'm going to go ahead and click play here. And as you see, I'm moving around. Normal jump height. Now I hold 1. Oh, excuse me, this one. And as you can see, I have been able to change the jump height. Then, when I release this one, it goes back to the normal jump height. So, again, this is the way you can create custom game logic. And again, we simply used some float values here and some simple setters and getters. Nothing too crazy, right? Let's look at one more just to get us going here. Let's make a shift to sprint. Okay, so I'm going to go here and I'm going to create a new event. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the shift key. Boom. So let's go to left shift, which is a keyboard event. Right? Now, something really cool about variables is they don't just have to be the primitive data types that we saw before. You can actually promote this to a variable. We'll actually look at that later. I won't cover that now. Let's just go ahead and keep this how it is for now. All right. So I'm going to grab the character move component again, just like so. And the reason why I'm grabbing the character move component is because in this details here, in the character move component, you have the max walk speed. So let's go ahead and find that. So the max walk speed is right here. And I can adjust this value here, but I can also adjust it here. So what I want to do is very similar to what I just did. I'm going to create a default walk speed. And a sprint feed. Boom. Okay. Both of these, again, are going to be floats because if I go back to the character move component here, notice that both of these are floats. I know they are floats because they contain that little decimal at the end here. So when I go to set their values, I need to make sure I set them to floats. All right, moving back over to the blueprint. When left shift is pressed, I want to take the character move component and I want to set the max walk speed. So I'm going to type in set max walk speed and it's right here. So there's my max walk speed. There's my setter. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and again duplicate this. And again, I need to specify the target. I need to essentially tell Blueprints which component has this max walk speed. In this case, it's the character movement component. So you do need to drag this here. If you don't drag this, then it's not going to know where the max walk speed is. It doesn't know. You have to specify. Now, here's my trigger, which is when my left shift key is pressed. When my left shift key is pressed, I'm going to set the max walk speed to a new speed. And when it's released, I'm going to set it back to a different speed. Then I'm going to go ahead and grab my variables here, compile them. Now the default walk speed I'm going to make 500, and then the sprint speed I'm going to make 1,000. Okay, now these both contain values. I'm now going to grab the default walk speed here. I'm going to do a getter for that. I can also hold control and drag it. And then I'm going to grab default walk speed, and when the key is released, I'm going to set it here. And then the sprint speed, same thing. I'm going to set this here. There we go. And then again, I always like to do this on my event begin play. I also want to set the default or the walk speed to the default walk speed. So I'm going to go ahead and do set max walk speed right here. I'm going to go ahead and drag this here. And I'm going to go ahead and drag this here. And I'm going to go ahead and grab the default walk speed, do a get, and drag it here. So when the game begins to play, it's going to set the max walk speed to my default, which is right here, currently set at 500. It's also going to set my jump velocity to the default jump height, and then it will continue to do this other logic. Then, whenever I click the 1 key, it's going to set my jump velocity to a new jump height, and then when I release it, it'll set it back to the original. And also now, when I click left shift, it's going to set my max walk speed to a new walk speed, and then set it back here to the original. To end this script out, I'm actually going to change the new jump height to something smaller now that we've seen the application of how to do that. And I'm also going to come to my components tree here and go to the third person blueprint at the top here. And I'm going to change the jump count. You can also come here and change jump count as well. Should be around here somewhere. Let's go jump height, blah, 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 blah. Max jump count, which is underneath the character component. So if I come here, here's max jump count. I can actually change this to 2, which now gives me double jump. Pretty cool. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and compile this. And as you can see, everything's here. I'm gonna go ahead and save. And just like that, I've created some initial gameplay movements. So now I can walk around. As you see, I have a slightly higher jump height because the original was, I think, 500 and now it's 700. When I hold the 1 key, my jump height is a lot higher, and I also have double jump now. So you could also think of this as modes, where if you clicked 1, maybe you're in a specific mode. Later we'll kind of look at that idea. Boom, boom. And then of course now also when I hold shift, I now move quicker. And just like that, I've created just a little bit of custom movement here in my character to kind of make this a lot cooler and really add some custom movement. So I hope this tutorial helped you. Again, this wasn't supposed to get super in-depth into Blueprint just yet. We will be doing a lot more of that, but again, just taking small baby steps and trying to improve our knowledge and understanding. Last thing I'm going to show here, and I'll probably show this a couple more times throughout the tutorial series, is sometimes you get your blueprints really a little bit hard to read what's going on. There's a very easy way to organize your pins here. If you double click on a pin, you can actually create a little pin here, and you can actually drag this so that it gets a little bit more organized. Because sometimes it's kind of hard to tell what is going to what and how it's going. So this is a good way to keep your blueprints nice and organized, so that way if another developer or if somebody needs to debug your blueprint comes by and wants to help you, they can. So if you had any questions on this video or had any comments or concerns, please let me know, and I will see you all in the next one.